Hi LuHi, welcome to day 2 of our online learning Lenten devotion through the book of Isaiah. Today we're focusing on chapter 5 verses 1 through 7. I put a link in my email from Monday with a link to that verse, but I will read it with you. If you want to follow along, I'll read it with you. So Isaiah chapter 5 starting verse 1. Let me sing a song for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked to it for it to yield grapes. But it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, an outcry. So I hope you've had a minute to read this before tuning into the video and reflect on what this means to you or what it means for you. But if you haven't, please take a second, just pause the video now and just reflect on these words and what God is trying to speak for you concerning these words. And now that you've had a second to do that, I'd like to share just a few musings of my own. This song is called the Song of the Vineyard, and it's one of the first times that Isaiah goes to actually proclaim this judgment to the people of Israel. Remember from chapter 1, God told Isaiah, he gave Isaiah these visions that Israel and Judah were going to be overtaken by Assyria and Babylon, that they were going to be destroyed, that even the temple would eventually be destroyed. And now, and he gave Isaiah the command to go and tell the people that this is what was going to happen. And so this is Isaiah going out and doing that. Isaiah proclaiming this to God's people. And he does it in kind of a sneaky way. He starts by telling a song about he says, let me sing for my beloved, my song concerning his vineyard. I want to sing this song about a vineyard. And he tells about this vineyard that he's put all kinds of time and effort into. He says, my beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. My beloved chose a perfect location for this vineyard, invested all kinds of time and energy and money into this vineyard. He looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. In that translation, wild grapes means grapes that were unsuitable for eating or for making wine with. And so in verse 3, Isaiah says, well, what would you do, O men of Israel and men of Jerusalem? What would you do if this were you? Would you continue to invest your time and energy into this vineyard, or what would you do if it was just yielding wild grapes? And he says, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. And he switches the perspective here. He was talking about his beloved, and that word beloved in Hebrew sounds a little bit like the word David. And we know the people of Israel are descendants of King David, and so this is maybe a hint as to the switch and maybe the bomb that Isaiah is about to drop on these people. The song of his beloved, and then he says, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my vineyard. He switches perspectives and says, well, I'm gonna remove its hedge, and it's going to be devoured. The wild animals will get in. I'm going to break down its wall, and people are going to trample over it. It's going to be made a waste, and briars and weeds are going to grow up, and I'm not going to prune them back anymore. And then he says something strange at the end of verse 6. He says, I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. And I would imagine that the people listening to Isaiah at this point have probably been imbibing some wine themselves, right? Isaiah was probably using a metaphor here that the people were familiar with. It was probably just an item on hand. And so I would imagine they're probably, agreeing pretty wholeheartedly with what Isaiah is saying. They say, yeah, of course, like this vineyard is terrible. It's yielding wild grapes. It's completely unsuitable for anything. It's a worthless vineyard. Yeah, so yeah, you should definitely remove the hedge. You should definitely tear the wall down and just destroy that vineyard. Do all those things, but then Isaiah says, I also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. And I imagine that made the people's ears kind of go, maybe prick up a second. You're going to command the clouds that they rain no rain upon this vineyard? That doesn't make any sense. And maybe that's, another clue that Isaiah's maybe not talking about a vineyard here. And he's not talking about him, a vineyard owner, destroying his vineyard. And then Isaiah drops the bomb. In verse 7, he says, For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. He says, look, people of Israel, God's people, you are the vineyard. You are the vineyard that has been poured effort and time and love and compassion from your master, from God. And yet, you are not producing the fruit that God is asking you to produce, right? Remember that God has chosen Israel to be his kingdom of priests and holy nation, right? That word holy, that separate, godlike people that was going to live in this covenant relationship with God, and in so doing, be a light to the rest of the world, right? Israel was supposed to be God's people, and through them, God would become known to the entire world. That was the fruit that Israel was supposed to be growing. A light, a beacon, like a lighthouse to the rest of the world. And Israel was not doing that. They were not living up to their part of the covenant relationship. And Isaiah calls them out on it. Isaiah says, you are this worthless vineyard that is not producing fruit. You are producing wild grapes. God looked to you for justice, but behold, bloodshed is what he got. He looked to you for righteousness, but behold, all he got was crying from you. And that is a lot of law. That is incredibly convicting, and it's kind of maybe a little scary to think about the fruit that we fail to produce as God's people nowadays. That we fail to produce the kind of fruit that God has commanded us to produce. But the good news is, and even though Isaiah doesn't make it explicit here, we will get there throughout the rest of this study. The good news is that even though we are weak, and even though we and the people of Israel fail to keep up their end of the bargain, as it were, fail to produce the perfect fruit that God expects them to produce, even though we are not perfect in our covenant love for God, God is still perfect in his covenant love for us. And even though sometimes the walls get torn down, and sometimes the hedges are pulled back, and sometimes briars and thorns grow up in our midst, and sometimes times are really hard here, God has never forsaken us, nor will he ever abandon us. He is always with us. And that is the good news that Isaiah is going to proclaim eventually. So we will get there over the next couple days. But otherwise, have a wonderful day, LuHi, and I'll talk to you soon.